So I'm really happy to introduce our next speaker. Most of you will be very familiar with him. He's certainly not a stranger to agriculture at all. From the NDP, Mr. Alistair MacGregor is here. He is the NDP critic for agriculture and agri-food, and he's going to give us a short speech, a few words, and then he's going to allow some time for Q&A from you, the audience. So when he comes to the end, be sure to rush to the microphone and ask him all the hard questions. So Alistair, come on up.
Appreciate a lot, Keith. Thank you so much. Me too. Sure, it's all you. Okay, appreciate it. Hello, everyone. It's good to see you all again. I see a lot of familiar faces out in the crowd. I got a few members of Parliament here who are colleagues of mine, and we're all watching our phone because we're about 8 minutes away from a vote. So right during the middle of my remarks, you may see me stop and just look at my phone. That's just me voting, and then I'll get right back to you. So I'm just keeping an eye on that. So I'm really happy to be here. I can't believe it's now been 4 years that I've been serving as the agriculture critic. It's actually taken up most of my time, my parliamentary career, and it's been an incredible journey for me, learning a lot from you, and I have really benefited, as indeed has our standing committee benefited, from the appearance of so many people that I see around this room. And I've always appreciated the lines of communication that we've had, where policymakers here in Ottawa are learning from the best practices that farmers are leading with, and we in turn try to reciprocate by putting those policies in place to make your lives easier and give you that incredible competitive advantage. I really enjoy the theme that we're operating under this year's AGM, finding those sustainable solutions in uncertain times. And I can remember some of the other themes that we had. I remember supporting I support producing prosperity in Canada. I was a proud signatory to that. And I know that your sector has gone through some incredibly difficult times. My riding out in Couch and Malahat Langford on beautiful Vancouver Island, we say that first rather than BC to differentiate ourselves. And I know there's a joke, it's a little bit of a tropical paradise out there. We've actually already collected our first harvest. That's how far ahead we are from the rest of the country. But, it has a very rich and diverse and very deep history, especially in the Cowichan Valley. People have been farming in that valley since before Canada was officially a country. And there are a number of farms there that, are ongoing 5 generations. And, I've been so privileged to learn from them and to take their knowledge with me here in Ottawa. I also want to recognize the role of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture. They have repeatedly and always been there to represent your interests and especially let us know of the important things that are going on in your world. So, let's break down the theme, the uncertain times that we live in. Well, we know that agriculture in a normal year is a high-risk business, and it faces many challenges in a, quote, normal year. But this has not been a normal year. It has not been a normal 2 years. And on top of the uncertainties that you already faced in labor, international trading agreements, the changing and ever-shifting geopolitical order, you've had to deal with the incredible challenges from a pandemic, but we've also, especially in my province of BC, we are starting to see the real economic cost of unmitigated climate change. My province, in the space of 3 short months, went from one of the worst wildfire seasons ever to catastrophic flooding that effectively cut off the Port of Vancouver from the rest of the country and certainly impacted many people in this room from their ability to reach overseas markets. And this will be the defining issue of this century, and it is going to grossly impact everything we do unless we get a handle on it. So if we're looking for sustainable solutions in the face of all those challenges, it'll come as no surprise to many of you who have followed me at the Agriculture Committee and indeed who have interacted with me that my main interests in agriculture have always been about how do we build resiliency into that system? Now, if we want to break down the word sustainability, we know that that's about meeting our own needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. But I think we need to expand beyond just sustainability, and we need to start talking about resilience and how we tackle and overcome these changes without being completely overwhelmed by them. I also think we need to open up conversation in the agricultural sphere on regenerative practices, where we pay close attention to what the natural environment does, and I know farmers are already doing this, but we want to observe those patterns and try and emulate them as best we can, because we know Mother Nature already knows how to do this stuff. We're at our best trying to do a poor imitation of what the natural world does perfectly every single time. And of course, if we do employ these practices, farmers are going to see added benefits. They're going to see reduced input costs, which I know affects every farmer's bottom line, and they're going to see their soil return a bounty that rewards them for all of the hard work that they've put in. And farmers are indeed showing us the way. I can remember in the summer of 2020, I took a tour in the interior of southern British Columbia, and a couple of ranches that had won awards for sustainability were kind enough to give me tours of their operations. And so I got to see firsthand what those regenerative and incredible sustainable rotational grazing methods were like firsthand. I've seen farmers who have joined me on town halls who are employing those regenerative principles and really blazing a path forward that many of us could be following. So if we're looking at the way the federal government can fit into this larger conversation, because I know that a lot of us are wary of an Ottawa knows best approach, but there is room for the federal government to occupy a space of leadership and to really work with farmers in a collaborative way so that we do find a way forward. I'd like to put a plug in for my own private member's bill, Bill C-203. Through that piece of legislation, I'm hoping to establish a national strategy on soil conservation, because we know that healthy soils, are the keystone element to a successful agricultural business. And indeed, all of our productivity flows from healthy soils. So I think that, the federal government, through such a national strategy, can really be there to help analyze the status of our soils, give us a more up-to-date map of how they're actually doing, collecting data on soil health so that it's really usable in every single region. Also, maintain, enhance, and rebuild the capacity of soils to produce food and fuel in a sustainable manner. But we also want to encourage that knowledge transfer. We want to have that ability so that farmers are indeed learning from the best practices that are out there. Some of the other sustainable solutions, I know the Canadian Federation of Agriculture is very concerned about ongoing issues with our supply chains, with the availability of labor, and of course, how are we innovating, especially vis-a-vis some of our main competitors? Well, our committee has been hard at work at issues like this. We are looking at issues that are affecting the current supply chain. We're looking at the weaknesses in the current system and the ways that the federal government can really step in and be of assistance. We want to build efficiency in our transportation networks, find those alternate routes quickly and easily so that when we do have unexpected disasters like what we saw in November in British Columbia, we do have contingency plans and we do have that theme of resiliency really built into the system. So I would encourage everyone also to look at previous reports that we've done at the committee, especially in the previous parliament. We did a pretty thorough study on Canada's processing capacity and the things that we really need to invest in to encourage, especially in smaller communities, that processing capacity, because we know that for many small communities, those are good paying jobs, they're becoming more technical in nature, and the people who get education for those jobs learn how to do robotic processing, making sure that the machines are properly maintained. Those can be extremely important for local and small communities. So in innovation, an incredibly important topic, we have looked at ways that the federal government can basically create a technology monitoring initiative so that we're identifying those growth opportunities. We've made a recommendation to promote high-tech opportunities in the agricultural sector, make sure that we're reaching out to post-secondary and high school students, because I don't think there is enough of a link there where people in high school and in post-secondary education understand the very highly specialized and technical jobs that are available in 21st century agriculture in Canada. And we have so many startups, people with those wonderful ideas on paper, who just are lacking a way to get capital investment to see their idea go from paper to an actual concept, something that's three-dimensional and which can be shown around. And so we've made recommendations that the federal government can step in earlier and aid those important people. Before I conclude, I also want to make reference to the Grocery Code of Conduct, because I know this has been a big issue, and certainly at our committee we have heard from numerous trade and industry groups who have basically stressed the impact that they see of unfair business practices. The concentration in Canada's retail sector, especially when it comes to groceries, means that many of our smaller suppliers just don't have the capacity to negotiate on some of those hidden fees that are applied for, delivering too much, delivering too little. There's no consistency to this. So certainly at our committee, I think I can speak for my colleagues, there is widespread support there for the federal government in conjunction with provincial governments to have a mandatory enforceable code to make sure that we have a thriving and sustainable grocery industry that is to the benefit of all Canadians. So in conclusion, I just want to say that, the solutions are out there. We have an industry, an agricultural industry here in Canada that you can all rightly hold your heads up high about. We can be boastful about this, proud of the innovation, the can-do attitude that exists in the hard-working men and women of this country. And that's not to say, though, that we can't find room for improvements. In a previous life, I used to be a tree planter, and my company's motto was continuous improvement. Never accept the status quo, never accept doing things just because that's the way they've always been done. You've always got to look for ways that things can be done in a more efficient way, a more beneficial way, not only for humans, but for our communities and for the environment as a whole. So I want to salute the incredible work and advocacy of the CFA. I do very much enjoy these times, the privileges that I do have to come and speak with you, and I always will continue to look forward to the work that we do together to make sure that Canadian agriculture is the best in the entire world. So thank you so much. And I have a vote, so if you want to say a few words, Mary, I'll vote, and I'll come back for questions.
I hope you have better luck with your app than we did earlier with ours. We are a little tight on time. Paul, it was funny. Thank you. We're a little snug on time, and we are going to have comments from Monsieur Yves Perron once we finish with Alistair, once he's done with his vote. So what we'll do is we'll have to cut it a bit short, and we'll take probably 2 questions for each. So if there are a couple of questions for Alistair, it's a complicated vote.
Just trying to get my picture identified.
So I'll ask right now if there are people who do have some questions for Alistair, if you wouldn't mind queuing up right now, and we'll slide right into it, or we can leave him off the hook, and I'll count to 5 in my mind. Oh, we have, nous avons une question.
We have a question. Just one moment.
Tim, we have a question from Lynn Jacobson from the Alberta Federation of Agriculture. Lynn?
Yes. Since Mary now introduced me twice, I don't think she'd trust me to introduce myself here. Anyway, Alistair, I've met you before and I've had some talks with you. I guess my question around is on the resiliency you talked about and, finding different routes to port. And one of the things I sort of noticed during the last, I guess, with the flooding out in BC and even the fires, the port of Prince Rupert didn't seem to be picking up on grain transportation issues or grain transportation or loading, outloading because of, basically the single terminal up there. And I'm wondering if you've given thought to that at Agriculture Committee and maybe instead of everybody congregating at Port of Vancouver like they have, to maybe spread out a little bit more to the Prince Rupert area.
Yeah, no, that's a great one, and it's a perfect example of, I think, where we have to try and avoid siloed thinking, because, I mean, often at committee when we've been hearing testimony about the problems at the Port of Vancouver, is that, you know, we're often sort of encroaching on Transport Canada's territory, but, you know, the two are so closely linked. And the problem with Vancouver is that, you know, around its industrial yards, of course, is a great mass of people, right? Residential areas are right up beside industrial, and you're hemmed in by the mountains to the north and the U.S. border to the south. So I know the Port of Vancouver is trying its best. There are big projects in the works, but you are always going to have those bottleneck issues no matter how much the port facilities exist. So yeah, I think I don't want to presuppose what our committee's recommendations will be, but we have certainly heard from a number of witnesses and submissions that we do need to have those contingency plans in place and to look at alternative options so that when we do have either a major shutdown at one of our transportation arteries or when the port is just simply being too congested, we look at those other options. I think there's also room for the port to try and with the federal government's help, look at some kind of a just-in-time arrival system. I think that we have to have better communication between port operations and railway shippers and producers. We have had testimony indicating that the communication between all of those various players to the start to the finish of getting your product on a ship, there is room for improvement, so that might also be beneficial as well. Yeah. And I'm just, the light was too bright, so I'm just going to go off, but I'll listen to the question. Just give me 1 minute. Sorry about this.
You can go ahead with the question if you like.
Thanks, Mary. Paul Vickers from OFA. My question has to do with a private member's bill that I believe Ben Lobb is bringing forward. Bill C-238, 234. And it has to do with the carbon tax on propane and natural gas, on heating and cooling and grain drying. I was just wondering if you're familiar with it, and would your party consider supporting it, at least looking at the bill and maybe supporting it? It would make a big difference to the agriculture community all across Canada.
Yes, short answer is yes. The bill in its previous version was Bill C-206 in the 43rd Parliament. It was sponsored by Conservative MP Philip Lawrence. And yes, at that time, I did give my support at second reading. I gave my support during the committee meetings that we had in it because there was overwhelming evidence that while, of course, we do want to move to fossil fuel alternatives, especially when it comes to grain drying and now the heating of barns, we can only make that transition if commercially viable alternatives exist. And we heard very clearly that, especially with grain drying, those technologies were at least 10 years away. So if we're going to put in place these types of policies that incentivize farmers to move to other energy sources, we have to make sure first and foremost that the alternatives are there to exist. So I haven't looked, I think Mr. Lobb's bill might be slightly different, and I think its first hour of debate is on Friday, March the 25th. But if it is reasonably close to what C-206 was, I can say that I most likely will be giving it my support because I do believe we need to have a better look at it at committee.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yes, hello, Anthony ONeil from the Canadian Ornamental Horticultural Alliance. And as you're probably aware, and we're all very grateful that the 2 billion tree program has been announced. Significant portion of those trees through the administration by NRCan will be actually going into urban settings. So they won't be seedlings, they'll be actually mature plants at various stages of growth. And actually from your area in British Columbia, and many of our growers have been affected in that flood area, and BC is a large producer of those. We're talking about over 100 million trees that will have to be produced incrementally by our producers. And just wondering, you know, as the agricultural critic, and what your thoughts are as to how maybe the growers that are actually going to be producing these trees could actually mitigate their risks with that level of production, because that's a significant investment into their ramping up to actually have those trees go into the ground.
Yeah, it is, and I'm certainly excited by the commitments that have been made. You know, I think I have my old tree planting bags hanging up in the garage somewhere, so maybe I'll go and help. But that aside, you know, I think our next study, I know at committee, we are interested in looking at the, you know, the environmental assistance that the agricultural sector can play, like the important role it plays in combating climate change, the good work that farmers are doing. And so I think with relation to your question, that might be actually a perfect segue during the middle of that study to look at what producers are currently able to do with our tree planting goals, and what they need, what kind of security they need in order to scale up their operations. Because if they're going to be taking on all of that risk to try and fulfill what is essentially a federal mandate, I believe the federal government has to be there in some way, maybe in conjunction with the provinces, to provide that assistance to them. I know that the province in BC and the federal government not too many weeks ago did come out with an announcement of the financial compensation that will be going forward to everyone who is impacted by the floods. And, you know, I think based on what I spoke about and the reality that you all know, we know that climate change is not going away anytime soon, and we do have to be prepared for these extreme weather events and how they are going to impact not only our infrastructure, but also our farming operations. So I don't want to presuppose what our committee will look at, but I appreciate you bringing that to my attention, because I think that's something that we can weave into our next study. Yeah? Okay. Okay, well, I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone.